Hey everyone, and welcome back, or to the first time, to Inclusive Design 24, our 2025 edition. Uh, this conference is brought to you in partnership with our Platinum supporters, Accessibility Cloud and Intopia. If you're on social media, you can follow along at Mastodon, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky. And if you have questions for our talk, you can post them using the ID24 hashtag. You can also use the YouTube chat if you're viewing there. We'll be looking at all these places for questions for the Q&A at the end of this session. As a reminder, ID24 is a respectful community, and you can find our code of conduct on the Inclusive Design 24 website. And now I'm absolutely thrilled to turn it over to my guest host, the one, the only, Crystal Preston Watson. Take it away.
Yay. Thank you so much, Eric. And I am really excited because I get to introduce Shawn Watson Henry and Kevin White, and they're going to be speaking about W3C Web Accessibility Initiative. Why? Update what's in it for you. I'm really excited for this presentation. Over to you both, Shawn and Kevin.
Great. Thank you, Eric and Crystal. We're really excited to be here. Appreciate this opportunity to share the message and invite everyone to contribute. So, as Crystal said, we're going to talk about the W3C Accessibility Initiative, initials WAI, which we pronounce WAI, but unfortunately, screen readers pronounce it Y. And all the slides are online, and there's a link and a QR code, and I don't have to read this because the material will be available right after the call on the channel. All right, let's jump in. Just a little next. We're letting Kevin drive so we don't go back and forth. I have to remember that. I actually went to press next. It didn't work. So I'm Shawn, and I'm the director of WAI. And Kevin leads the technical work, including all the technical accessibility work, including the working group deliverables and the one that you probably know best, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, or we pronounce it WCAG. Next. Do you want to move your cursor, Kevin? Okay, what we'll cover today, we'll talk about W3C WAI and you. We'll go over some free online resources. We'll talk about WCAG 2 and WCAG 3, and then mention some free online courses. And there will be several bits of unannounced information that you will hear first. So we got permission to share, or decided to, a combination of that, to share some of the some information now that we'll be announcing next week and in the coming weeks. So some of it we'll point out, some of it we won't. You'll just have to see if you can find it. You've already seen some of it. So there, something fun to watch for. All right, next. Just to provide some context, so W3C is the World Wide Web Consortium. It started about 30 years ago by Tim Berners-Lee, who is the inventor of the web. And W3C is a nonprofit. We develop the standards that enable the World Wide Web to connect and empower humanity is our mission. As I mentioned, you probably best know the Accessibility Initiative from our Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or the WCAG standards. But we do many, many more things. We do have additional other standards, and we'll talk about, briefly mention some of the other work that we're doing. And we have a lot of resources. We have a lot of educational resources and material to support a wide range of aspects of accessibility. So I'd encourage you to, learn what you can, take some from there. We also, the tagline that we've developed with some videos I'll show you later is accessibility is essential for some and useful for all. The cool thing is that you can be a part of all this work. It's not, W3C is all about bringing together stakeholders from around the world, people with disabilities, from industry, from governments, from educational institutions, research, etc., bringing everybody together. And you can be a part of that. Next. So how you can contribute to accessibility with W3C. We have a page that we update every month that talks about what we're working on. And so you can see what are the active things that we're working on, if there's anything there that's, which things there that you're particularly interested in contributing to. And that also, by the way, has introduction to just pointers to the working groups and to some of the resources. So if you haven't seen that page, what we're working on, I encourage you to take a look. Go ahead and read through that after the presentation and find out what information there would be relevant and useful for you. And there's a change log, so you don't have to read it every month. You can just look at the change log. We also have a WAI interest group, and it's primarily a mailing list, and anybody can subscribe to the mailing list. You can send questions, and so you're welcome to do that. We also have an announce list where we send announcements. We keep that very clean. We don't send very many messages, so usually only a couple messages a month. So that's a way to get news and information about drafts that are available for review, because that's the best time for you to contribute is when we have drafts that we announce, hey, we're ready for you to review these. And as a matter of fact, we have some out for review now. We have a deadline coming up of Tuesday, the 30th of September. So if you're available and interested to review, go ahead and check out the WAI interest group information. And there's also all the messages are archived. So whether or not you subscribe to the list, you can get the archived messages. So you can go see what's available for review right now. So we really would love your help to improve the resources that we provide, the standards that we developed. The bottom of each web page on the WAI subsite, there's a box at the bottom. It says, help improve this page. And there's a link to GitHub and email, so you can submit suggestions that way. And again, when we have drafts for review, we'll provide a link to where you can find the information on where to send input. So you can send input, you can contribute to the discussions. A lot of our discussions are on GitHub. And again, you can submit emails, so you can contribute to the discussions of things we're working on. And you can also join a community group. So this is something that W3C started quite a while ago, and we're continuing to just expand the community group, how we're using community groups. And again, that's something it's open to anyone to participate. So to be a active participant in the working groups, there's some more requirements, but for community groups, anyone can join. So yeah, that's another way you can contribute to accessibility with W3C. I'll just show you, tell you about a few of the community groups next. So the first one, next, yeah, there. Accessibility roles and responsibilities mapping. I'll talk about that resource in a little bit, but that's a relatively new one, so a good one to jump in and help. Next. Advancing Accessibility Resources is a group that helps with some of the education and outreach, education materials that we have on the WAI website, and we're going to be updating those. So we expect that group is kind of on hold right now, but we expect that later this year, maybe not to the beginning of next year, that group will be getting active again. Next. Accessibility for children. Next. And actually, Crystal, I think you had asked about this. If I recall, that was you asked about this at, when we did a presentation in May. The accessibility for children, that group focuses on what children need for accessibility requirements, as opposed to like teaching accessibility to younger people. Next is accessibility and internationalization. And next, a new one. So again, oh, I gave away. This is the first time you're hearing it. Yes, so we have a new community group started that's looking at authoring tool accessibility guidelines. So some of you may remember that we have authoring tool accessibility guidelines that haven't been updated for a while. And we'll be saying more coming up about that project, but we're super excited to have this work starting up. So looking at updating what we already have, and also specifically looking at how the role of AI. And this group will be working closely with the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group to coordinate the guidance that we're providing in the Authoring Tool Accessibility Guidelines updated version and in the WCAG 3, which Kevin will talk about. So these are just some. There's some other community groups, but that's another opportunity for you to be involved and help. Next. Okay, I'm going to just go through a few of the resources that you might be interested in and not know about. Again, I think there's that over 70, so definitely jump in and learn some more. Find some that you might find useful or to share with others. We'd love your help in getting the word out about those. A couple of things. I put some screen grabs in here, but I'm not expecting you to read them from the screen. I'll highlight I'll speak the information that I want you to get out of them. And the headings are linked to the resource itself. So afterwards, you can download the presentation. You can, or it's not download, it's online. You can access the presentation online and follow the links to these. Next. Okay, the first one that I want to talk about is accessibility is about people. So one of the big things, standards play an important role in accessibility. Yet standards are not the reason we do accessibility. The reason we don't is it's not to just, check the box and say we did it. The reason we care about accessibility is to improve the user experiences of people with disabilities using digital technology. So I think we've had some material on this in the past, but we're really emphasizing this material, and I think it helps when that comes from the standards development organization directly to say, yeah, the standards are one piece. But we have resources then to help with both understanding, fundamentally understanding like how people with disabilities use the web. So we have user stories. We talk about different, like the technologies, assistive technologies, and adaptive strategies that we use to access the web, and several pretty robust resource there just to help focus on, okay, it's about people to start there. We also have some resources on including users with disabilities from the very beginning of projects. So, whether it's co-design and how to find users, people, and so some information to help you, number one, convince your project manager, and number two, to actually do it. And then we also have some more information on including disabled people in evaluating accessibility as well. So there's some resources we hope that you find useful, and you can quote us on it. W3C, the developers of the standards, say it's not only about standards, it's about user experiences. That's really what's about. The standards is just a tool to help us get there. Next. Okay, one of the resources we have was the first link. I didn't mention it because I was going to talk a little bit more about it. It's a series of videos that actually is where we came up with that tagline, accessibility is essential for some and useful for all. So each of these is a series of 10 videos. They're really short, I think about a minute long. And they illustrate why a specific thing is essential for people with disabilities and useful for others in different situations. So for example, one is about text customization, one is about video captions, and it's just a little segment that explains that. And there's also a compilation of all of them, which is about 7 minutes. So people have found this really useful and like to use in your presentations. You're welcome to use all these in your presentations, or just to point someone, a colleague to you're trying to explain this, or as part of the business case. Yeah, so hopefully you find those videos really useful. Oh, the other thing is, there's a lot of people know about the video, but each page has additional information. So go look at the page because it actually explains yeah, a little bit about it, about who uses it, why it's important, additional benefits, and where you can find more information and guidance on the W3C WAI website. Next. Okay, I mentioned the accessibility roles and responsibilities mapping, which we like the acronym ARM. So ARM. ARM is something that's been developing for many years. And we're excited that the folks that have been working on it, I won't mention names because I might leave one off, but you can find it in the acknowledgments for this. But they, yeah, we're able to bring that to a point where we could publish it on the site. So what ARM is, it helps you know like which roles should be working on which responsibilities in accessibility. So let me just give you like a simplified example. Like roles that contribute to meeting the WCAG requirements for headings, the writers are responsible for writing the heading text. The designers are responsible for defining how the headings look. And then developers are responsible for coding or marking up the headings. So that's a brief introduction. It's a robust resource, so I encourage you to take a look at that. And they are actively working on that. So we would love to have additional help with refining that. So this is a community group. Anyone can join. Next. Okay, going to crank through. We have some resources on tips for getting started. We have tips for writing, for designing, and for developing. Next. I'm looking at my time, so I gotta quit jabbering. We have a series of tutorials that cover things like page structures, menus, images, tables, forms, and carousels. Next. We have a resource on making audio and video media accessible. And this covers the things you would normally think of, like description of visual information, or audio description, or describe video, captions or subtitles, transcripts, sign languages, the things you would normally think of, but it also covers some other things. Next. For example, it covers media player, talks about do you use a media player that supports accessibility. And then another thing that it does that I think that a lot of resources don't do is helps with that, you know, that idea of shifting left, that is, go ahead next, that is considering accessibility early. And with media, I think that's even so much more important. You know, once you already have a video done, trying to retrofit accessibility is, yeah, it's often just not feasible. So this resource helps you step up a level. So it talks about how do you plan? What do you plan for developing your media? What do you do in-house? What do you outsource? What do you need to think about ahead of time? And then there's a whole section on making the audio and video content itself accessible before you even do filming. You know, what kind of things do you need to think about when you're doing your scripting, when you're doing your planning, when you're doing your storyboarding. And then even before that, again, is we have a page that talks about the user experiences. So again, fundamentally, don't jump into the standards, but first, fundamentally start out by understanding the user experiences of people with disabilities. And this also has a section on the benefits to organizations. And I think this is one of the strongest selling points. So I encourage you to take a look at that if that's something you're interested in. And then next, finally, I wanted to mention that we have many translations of W3C accessibility resources. We have translations in over 35 languages, I think. And again, we very much welcome additional translations. So if that's something that you might be interested in, let us know. All right. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin to talk about WCAG.
Thanks so much, Shawn. Hi, everyone. As Shawn says, Kevin White. I head up the technical stuff, which really means that I support sort of a number of groups that really do all the work. And again, I'm not going to mention names because I will forget people, but all of the work that we do on WCAG is supported by task forces and working groups and loads of really, really fantastic people that are contributing to this work. So that's all behind everything that I'm talking about. So first off, I wanted to talk about just a couple of things around about WCAG 2 to give some updates about that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about WCAG 3 and how that is developing and some of the questions that we're exploring. So WCAG 2, we are managing a huge backlog of issues on WCAG 2. And about a couple of years ago, there was a backlog task force set up to manage those issues and kind of corral a whole lot into sense. And just last week, they kind of announced that they've cleared 500 issues from that backlog, which is an impressive feat and something that's really to be cheered. There is still a lot to do, but I think we've got some superb people that are working on that, and there are many opportunities for anyone to kind of contribute to that, either through solutions, which are really appreciated, or adding more issues to the pile, which may be necessary, but that'd be all good. So you can do that. There's a GitHub repository that manages all that. The other thing in WCAG 2 is we have had JSON versions of WCAG 2 for a while. They haven't really been maintained as well as we would like. But just recently we are, well, actually, it was last week we finalized a lot of stuff with this, but we've released 2 versions, one for WCAG 2.2, one for WCAG 2.1 in JSON. This includes all the content from the standards and the techniques, and it's easy enough to create links to the understanding documents. This will be maintained at the same pace as our understanding documents and techniques, which are updated on a monthly basis with the work from the backlog task force. We will do our very best not to break it, but we do reserve the right, if the structure changes, we may need to change the JSON itself, but hopefully we shouldn't have to do that. So again, this is something that I'm really pleased that we're able to offer, and gives a great opportunity for any tool developers or anybody that kind of wants to grab that content and integrate it. Makes it much easier to do that. Okay, so talking about WCAG 3. So I kind of want to explore a couple of things. So first off, it's just a quick recap on the approach that we're taking. An update on our latest publication. We just had one a couple of weeks back. And then just a little bit of an explore about some of the key questions that we're looking into. This isn't by any stretch all of the work that the working group is doing or all the questions that they're exploring, but it kind of highlights some of the thorny topics that we get into when we start exploring standards and how to standardize what we mean by accessibility so that it kind of it works for everybody. So a quick recap on our approach. We are developing a new structure for the approach to the guidelines. There's much more of a focus on taking a user needs-led approach, and you'll see that if you do review the new draft version. The guidelines talk about what users need a lot. So it's very clear that we're kind of trying to ground this in the user need, and then exploring, well, okay, what are you required to do in order to meet that need? So we're trying to make sure that we cover it from that perspective. We're also trying to increase the coverage. We're always trying to work out how do we ensure that we're supporting more functional needs so that there are fewer people excluded because of accessibility issues. So a quick overview on the structure for WCAG 3 that we've got. So the kind of, I mean, anybody that's familiar with WCAG 2 will know the perceivable, operable, understandable, robust principles, and then there are guidelines, and then there are success criteria with supporting material in an understanding and techniques document. In WCAG 3, we kind of start at the guidelines. They are grouped together, but I'm not entirely sure we've come up with a good name for those groupings just yet. But we've got guidelines, and they are plain language outcome statements. So they kind of set out what the users need and what are your guidelines that you're following. Within all of the guidelines are foundational and supplemental requirements. Now these specify how you achieve that guideline. And they are intended to be testable elements, are features, and kind of clearly articulate what it is that you have to do in order to conform with that particular issue. And they're supported, so the informative material, the way that we're approaching it for WCAG 3, we've got how-tos, and we're exploring creating content that outlines how to achieve that requirement. Now that might include various different methods for how to achieve that, and that will also include the tests. So the how-to information is informative, so that's not required. They're not required to be met. There may be different ways to achieve the requirement. There may be different ways to test it. So that's all informative and supports it. The other aspect of guidelines, and another way to demonstrate conformance in a certain way, and I'll come to that, are things called assertions. And these are being included to support aspects of accessibility which we know will improve the experience for some users, but they're harder to define and harder to kind of outline. Well, what exactly is this, and how exactly do I ensure that it's going to create a kind of a testable outcome, or it's going to create a testable requirement that we can consistently apply and consistently explore. So we have this concept of assertions. I'll come to that in a little bit. And then again, we've got how-tos that support that material. So as we're developing WCAG 3, we're very conscious about the status of material and how it is developing in maturity. And we kind of developed a while back a series of maturity levels, and each part of content is defined as being part of one of these levels. And this is important for understanding both how consistent and stable that content is, but also to a certain extent what sort of feedback and so forth we're needing. These are explored much more in, there's an explainer document, but roughly speaking, we've got placeholder, that's kind of, it roughly identifies needs and possible directions and is very, very likely to change. Exploratory, we've got a reasonable idea of the direction which we're exploring. It's lacking detail, is likely to change, but it's kind of getting there. Developing, that's we've got much more defined. We've got the direction defined. We're working out details. The details are likely to change, but the direction not so much. Refining, we've got group consensus. Details might change again, the sort of use of language and so forth, but the direction won't change really. And then mature, that's content that's ready to go. So as you look at any of the materials that are being created, you'll see an indication of the maturity level of that content, and I will talk about it when I come to the latest publication. So this was published on the 4th of September, so that's a couple of weeks ago. This is based on extensive work on all the requirements since the start of 2025. What we've done at this stage is we've kind of removed all but the developing content from this publication. And that's just so you can kind of see what the scale of the work that's been done and focus on the kind of stuff that's that little bit more mature, a little bit more defined in terms of providing feedback. All the additional exploratory content, that's all available in the editor's draft. Again, that's all linked from the publication. I've also included a link here. We're really interested in feedback on this, what people think about the content, the structure, the approach, the language, the whole works. So you can comment on that within the GitHub repo. There's information on how to do that within the actual the document itself. So if you go up to the top of the document, it'll link you through to the GitHub repo. So really, really welcome information in that. So I wanted to talk about some of the thornier questions that we're exploring. As I say, these are just some of the questions that the working group is looking into, but we kind of try to spend a lot of time looking at this because we know from past research and from a lot of the questions that come from the community that these are really important aspects of the standard and what the standard could be. So one of the ones that we've kind of looked at and taken quite seriously is how to make WCAG more user-friendly. There's a number of ways to do that, and I'll talk about that in a second in terms of how we've approached it. One of the other ones is, and again, this is kind of how do we expand WCAG to cover more functional needs, in particular things like cognitive disability and low vision needs. So there's a lot of work being done to look at that. Another area which is tricky because it's a little bit crystal ball in terms of we've no idea what the future looks like, but it's how do you make WCAG more future ready? The changing pace of technology, the interfaces provided, the capacity and capabilities of the assistive technology, all of these are kind of rapid in their improvements, and sometimes we need to make sure that we're supporting that and the requirements cover those sorts of things. So how do you actually write a standard that actually addresses that and ensures it's still relevant as these new developments come along? The last one's kind of very particular around about the conformance model. So one of the challenges that WCAG 2 presents in terms of conformance is that it's an all or nothing. You either 100% pass or you fail. Now that comes with a challenge in and of itself, and there's a kind of question around about, well, how do we explore avoiding the issues that are present within that? So I'm just going to talk about these questions and the approaches that we've taken. Again, this is kind of surface. I'm not going to cover everything in extensive detail, but we'll see what we get to. So in terms of creating user-friendly standards, so there was extensive research carried out by the Silver Task Force prior to all of the work that we've got now. A couple of the issues that they highlighted, and they highlighted a lot of stuff around about improvements and opportunities for improvement within WCAG, but it was very much around about that user experience of the standard and how you engaged with it. And two of the points that I'm pulling out here are kind of writing in an uncomplicated way. So using plain language in terms of presenting the standard as much as is possible. And I think we have to acknowledge that we need to be very precise in the language that we use in order to ensure that there's no ambiguity in what we're actually requiring of people. But when we do that, it's still often beneficial to come at it with a lens that's kind of going, well, is this as simple as we can make it without undermining that or without adding any ambiguity? The other point that came across from the research was around about easier points of access. How do we onboard people more easily? How do we handhold people into understanding the standards? So a couple of things that we've done is we've taken a plain language approach. We've kind of walked the talk that we're talking about in the standard. And so we're trying to, the order slightly off here, but we're trying to use a style guide to ensure that the language that we're using is always scrutinized to ensure that it's as simple and straightforward as possible to make it easier to kind of get to grips with the material. The other thing that we've done within this space is we're trying to unpack some of the more complex criteria and just make those much more atomic, much more straightforward, and not loading too much onto any particular requirement. And again, I'll come to some examples just in a second. The final thing that we're starting to look at now is, although it's still early days for this one, is looking how can we use the supplementary materials. So for WCAG 2, that would be understanding documents, techniques documents, but also a lot of the material that's on the WAI website. How do we use those as an onboarding ramp to help people who are new to accessibility, new to standards, new to the work that W3C does? How do we create a space that makes it easier to kind of on-road into that material without without having them to read a large standard document as the first point of learning. So all of those things are things that we are working on. We've brought a lot of that to the publications, the last two draft publications. We will continue to be doing more. So just an example of the guideline, this is the guideline 2.1.1, which talks about image alternatives and some of the requirements and an assertion within those. There are actually more, and these are at different maturity levels, which I haven't included here. But this is just to give you an example of the approach that we've taken to language and how we're making it user needs led. So the guideline itself is users have equivalent alternative for images. Full stop, nice and straightforward. And then the requirements kind of unpack that statement and outline what do we mean by that, how do we achieve that. So a couple of a foundational requirement here is about decorative images, and again fairly straightforward. Decorative images are programmatically hidden. I would love to get a shorter word for programmatically and it makes it more straightforward, but unfortunately we've not been able to find one, so we're stuck with that for just now. A supplementary requirement, this is one that's kind of a exploratory stage, is around about image role. So the role and importance of images are programmatically indicated. So again, keeping it nice and simple, nice and focused. And then there's an assertion, and that assertion is that there's a style guide, and that's content authors follow an organizational style guide for text alternatives. So what I'm trying to illustrate there is just how we've made the language much more focused, made the requirements much more focused, and made the guideline themselves much more user focused. So I hope that kind of comes across. So I want to talk a little bit about expanded cognitive needs coverage or expanded coverage. And this is one of the challenges here. It's kind of difficult to create requirements that you can kind of go, right, this is repeatable. Any two auditors that come along are going to come out with more or less the same issues when they test against these requirements. It's difficult sometimes to kind of nail those down. We have got a lot of opportunities for improvement, a lot of opportunities for adding things and responding to identified functional needs. But one of the ways that we're doing that is around about these assertions. And what they allow us to do is address those requirements, which we know are good things to do, but are very difficult to define. So if I give you an example of an assertion, and then I'll talk through what we're trying to do with this. So this is an assertion which is cover a plain language review. So content authors conduct plain language reviews to check against plain language guidance appropriate to the language used. This includes checking that verb tense is used as easiest to understand in context, content is organized into short paragraphs, and paragraphs of information content informative content, begin with a sentence stating the aim or purpose of the content. Now, if we look at the second one of those, this content is organized into short paragraphs. The challenge that you have with that, if you're looking to make that a requirement, is what do we mean by short? Is it short is very contextual and it's very relevant to the material that's being assessed. And some people might go, well, short in this case is 300 words. Short in this case is 10 words. So it's very difficult to kind of define what that is. However, what an assertion allows the organization that's creating the content to do is they can kind of go, we assert that we have done a plain language review. And then an auditor can come along and go, they've asserted this, that's good. And they might find that there are still problems, but that assertion process and the act of following the guidance there and kind of taking approaches which people think are good practice, that helps them basically improve accessibility. And this will be important when we come to talk about conformance. So quick thing talking about ready for the future. So as I said, technology is changing, it's going to continue to do so. We're at the stage already. Browsers and web pages, they aren't the only way to access web content. Mobile's already pushing the boundaries of WCAG. We have got a task force that's looking into that, and they're doing some fantastic work. But you've also got different types of interfaces, such as voice, engaging directly with AI agents engaging with interfaces in their own. These all add different challenges to how you assess content and how you define what you are auditing or indicating conformance. So one of the areas where, again, we're exploring on this one, although it's a little bit more defined, is trying to move away from this idea that interfaces don't all fit into having a web page or a site model. So within that, rather than talking about web pages as the kind of primary unit of conformance, we talk about pages or views. So you'll see throughout the standard there's page/view, where you might expect to see web page. And that's defined as content that is actively available in a viewport. And we can expand upon what viewport is and what content is, and all of those things can be defined. But what it's allowing us to do is kind of taking a step back. Web page can still be used as a unit of conformance, but it doesn't need to be the only thing that's used as a unit of conformance. You can approach it from different ways. And the goal with this is to allow for different conformance or different scoping for the purposes of conformance. And then finally, I just want to quickly talk about a really small topic, not quite. It's around about this whole idea of pass-fail conformance. So just to be clear, and it's one that I always like to point out, is there is a difference between conformance and compliance, and it's an important one. Conformance talks about the meeting a standard, whereas compliance is about meeting a regulation. And they could be subtly different, and that's an important distinction to make, but it's worth bearing in mind. For WCAG 2, you basically, a website either conforms with WCAG 2 or it doesn't. Now, it could fail on one thing on one page, but that would still be classed as a fail. And that can bring its own problems in terms of how we demonstrate improvement and progress for organizations that are seeking to become more accessible. So we're exploring a lot of stuff with WCAG 3 conformance. This is all in development. So it's increasing maturity, but effectively what we've got is foundational requirements are that meeting all of the foundational requirements would be, that's your baseline. If you don't meet that, you would be classed as failure. But then you've got supplemental requirements and assertions, and what they allow you to do is, as you meet more of those, you can kind of get higher levels of conformance, whether that's bronze, silver, gold, or however we kind of finally land on that. But it allows for the demonstration of more and more and more accessible. The other thing within this space that we're exploring is around about, can you report against functional needs, and kind of go, actually, from looking across all functional needs, we can say it supports 20% of low vision, or 30% within cognitive functional needs. That's a very sort of early stage thought on that one, but it might give us another way to look at how products meet, or products conform with the WCAG 3. So some quick next steps. We've got another draft looking to be published late in 2025, early 2026. So we'll be, again, pushing forward with the requirements, increasing their maturity. Within that, we're hoping as well to develop maturity of the conformance model, so that's more a developing stage and a little bit more defined. And the other thing that we're looking to publish within that timescale as well is a plan for the next few years. So looking at what can we expect to be publishing and over the next 2 years, probably, maybe 3, so that people have a rough idea of what to expect from us. And I'm going to hand back to Shawn now.
Leave it here. Yeah, leave it. Oh, go back, go back, go back. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Just to wrap up on that, I mean, one of the big things to note, in case you didn't catch it, WCAG 3 is a few years away. So, keep be in mind of that. And we have a WCAG 3 intro page that we keep updated with the latest information. We'll make sure that that's linked here, but that's the starting point for information. I encourage you to, share that to get the latest straight from W3C. I have all sorts of expressions that may not translate well, so I won't do those. Okay, the final thing I wanted to mention next, thanks, is that we have a free course. So we have a free online course, Digital Accessibility Foundations. The course is, it's online, and there's optionally you can pay to get a certificate if you complete it and pass all the tests. The course is designed for technical and non-technical learners, especially the first part. It's 5 different modules, so you can pick the modules that you're most interested in and explore those more deeply. And another bit of news is that we're working on new courses for 2026. We're excited about being able to expand the offering of the free online courses. Next. Good.
Last.
I know, yeah. But I wanted to put up that QR code in case it's easier to get from here instead of following up later. And then we'll hand it back to, I guess, Crystal and Eric to see if we have time for any questions.
Hello. Wow. Thank you. That is so much content and it's so good. Thank you for making it approachable and understandable, and also just for the massive amounts of labor that goes into producing things like this. I think we have time for maybe one quick question. Crystal, would you do the honors?
Yes. Let me get into Sorry, I'm like I was right there. I will get right there. You think I would have been there right there right now. Yeah, we'll just take that. Yeah, like what actually this one I really like. What is an interesting or notable issue you've seen filed against WCAG, WCAG, however, how I say WCAG, but I know some people prefer another pronunciation.
Do you mean like what's one of the open things we're working on? What do you mean by that? I'm not sure about the question.
Oh, yeah, I think if you don't mind me speaking in, or
Yeah,
Crystal.
you go. Yeah.
Yeah, just like as, as basically the place where everybody goes, as the ultimate source of truth. Like, I'm sure you've seen things that are like either like I never thought somebody would think this way, or like, oh, that's funny, or like just, not necessarily a negative thing, just more like does something pop to mind as like, oh, that's interesting.
I
Shawn,
there's
you can
tons
answer
of
that one.
like I know. I mean, I'm like indexing. What do I say? What do I say? I don't know. The thing that popped in my head, so I'll mention it. Is one of the so WCAG 2 talks about how to make text more readable for people with low vision, which I
Mhm.
appreciate. Um, and because I have low vision myself. And so the parameters apply well in some language systems, but in different language systems, they're different. So, if you have CJK was Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Arabic, a lot of all different types of languages. What the parameters are to increase the readability for people with low vision is different. So
Yeah,
there's an example that popped into my head.
I
And
love that.
just to
Thank you.
piggyback on that one, it's a fascinating topic that we're looking at for WCAG 2 and for WCAG 3. And one of the
Right.
challenges is actually getting the research to know what the readability metrics are. So it's not even about how to write it in such a way that it applies to certain languages. It's understanding, well, what line spacing do you need for a vertically presented language? What character spacing do you need? Particularly for some languages like Japanese, which may not include spacing between words. What does that do, and how does something like dyslexia as a reading disability, how does that express itself with a pictographic language?
Yeah.
So if anybody knows of any research about this sort of stuff, we would love to hear from you. Really, really love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I love that answer so much, and it's very interesting. It's also like one of the through lines through the conference of like translation and localization and non-English languages. So just really cool. Alrighty. So I'm gonna do my little wrap up thing, but before I do, just thank you again for your time and your effort. We really appreciate it, and I thought this talk was really engaging and entertaining, so I appreciate that as well.
You're
If
welcome.
you, the viewer, either live or recorded, enjoyed this session, you can hit button on YouTube. You could also subscribe if you'd like to be kept in the loop for future events. And Inclusive Design 24 is brought to you with thanks from our platinum sponsors, Accessibility Cloud and Intopia, our silver supporter, Intuit, and our bronze supporters, the Law Office of Laney Feingold, Mantis and Company, and Vispero. And we'll be back at the top of the hour with our next session. See y'all then.